Hey, what's up, everyone? So, Tim Ferriss's new book, Tools of Titans, has come out. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 things I learned from the book, as well as a quick bio and profile on who Tim is, why this book is useful, and a few tips on reading this. And then I'll conclude with the more critical aspect where I kind of tear his book apart a bit and say what I didn't like about it in a constructive way, and then conclude with a few things I did like about this book. So let's just get started. So who is Tim Ferriss? Well, I think to the general public, no one knows who he is, but he has a very strong following of a few million, which you might seem like a lot, but spread across billions of people, not necessarily. But in that, small community, he is like a rock star. Everyone knows him, and basically he's a tech entrepreneur, best-selling author, and podcaster. Those are his main 3 things. His podcast recently passed over 100 million downloads. I'll leave a link in the description for that. And his tech investing, he's invested in a number of high profile tech companies like Uber, and of course that's where he's made most of his money. And finally, his books are actually where most people know him by, which is funny enough. But his books, he's pretty much written 3 so far, and they are all around this 4-hour series. The first one was called 4-Hour Work Week. Second one was called 4-Hour, I think it was Chef. And then the third one was 4-Hour Body. And then, of course, as kind of implied by the gimmicky title, those books kind of make you think that this guy's either a scam artist or he has some very unconventional ways of doing things. And that's exactly what he does. He had this business where he sells supplements, and he was making a lot of money, but was working 18 hours a day and burnt out. Then he completely hacked his way, changed his whole life around, and did all sorts of crazy stuff. He outsourced everything and would pretty much dialed down to 4 hours a week of actual work. Then he went on to break a few world records, travel the world, and pretty much live a dream lifestyle in a way. So very interesting guy. He has a lot of unconventional ways of doing things, and I think that's the reason he sticks out, because he's all about doing things in very different ways to achieve those results. Now, are those results a bit sensationalistic? Are his techniques always the best? I'll leave that up to you to decide, and I'll save it for the critique section. Anyhow, he released his newest book, which is pretty thick. It's really thick, actually. This is my hand. This is how thick this book is. It's actually 500 pages long. And before you get intimidated, first and foremost, this book is actually written in a way where you're not supposed to read it all. See, he addresses this in the foreword of his book, but he also addresses this in a podcast episode he released before the book came out. And he basically said that it's kind of like one of those anthologies or textbooks where you pick out the parts that you want to read and you read them. So that's kind of how you want to read this book. Of course, you're probably wondering what this book is. And just as a disclaimer, this video is not, it's not a paid endorsement in any way. I just wanted to talk about this book. And you would kind of see why, that you'll pretty much see how honest I'm being once you hit the section in this video where I critique this book, because I might go a little hard. But having said that, this book is as it sounds. It's his new, he's finished with the 4-hour series, and now he's moved on to other projects. And this book is basically a compilation of all the stuff he has learned from studying, interviewing, and he calls it, dissecting the minds of some of the world's top class performers and living a optimized life. And so that's kind of his style of doing things. He says about 60% of the book is a rehash of the podcasts. So he does a lot of podcast interviews with successful people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jamie Foxx, and some people that you may not know but are actually really successful as well. Some of them are really wealthy tech investors. others are billionaires, and others are really famous and well known. And he basically, kind of repurposed that into this book. Again, he's been podcasting for a while, so that's why it's so thick. And then the other half of the book is from all the personal, private conversations he's had given his network in San Francisco. And from that network, he's taken a lot of notes, and he has never shared them until now. So he put this all into this book, and what's interesting is he split the book up into 3 parts that align with Ben Franklin's 3 pillars of success: health, wealth, and wisdom, which I think is very interesting. I think there's other pillars that are also important. I think those are great pillars, but I think on top of that, you also need happiness and love/relationships. So it's I would say there's 5 pillars in my opinion, but nonetheless, he breaks it up into 3 really good pillars, and basically, depending on what you want, you go to that section. So there's a section on health, there's a section on wealth, and then there's a section on wisdom. And of course, every section is pretty much a list of names, and you can kind of see it here if you look closely. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but it's basically just like here's the health or wealthy section, and a long list of names of people he's interviewed or talked to. And so each person gets around what seems to be 2 to 8 pages, kind of like a mini profile, and you get their advice on the topic. Now, here's what I've learned from the book. So I'm going to share with you 3 things I learned. The first thing was by Shay Carl. So Shay Carl is a very successful YouTuber. I've arguably already absorbed a lot of his success advice because I love listening to YouTube advice from successful YouTubers, and I think I've absorbed every piece of Shay Carl advice he's mentioned just from excessive searching. Nonetheless, I learned something interesting. He said, I learned this from this book. He said, the cliche things are sometimes the most important. And his example was eating broccoli and vegetables. It's very cliche, but he kept searching for something more complicated as an answer and always ignored that cliche. But one day he just sat down and ate broccoli and vegetables, and lo and behold, he got healthier and healthier. So sometimes it's not about complexity, it's just about doing what's cliche or common sense. And I see that a lot. A lot of people will watch self-development videos on YouTube or read books on self-development, and they're like, oh, that's so cliche or common sense. Work hard. Pff, and they won't actually work hard. So I think that's very interesting. Now, the second thing I learned from this book, of course, there's more than 3 things. So I just want to share with you 3 so this video doesn't go on forever. I mean, second thing I learned from this book is about how you can pretty much change your life for the better. So this one comes from another YouTuber. So Tim Ferriss interviewed Casey Neistat, and I learned in this book that Casey believes in sometimes channeling your anger towards doing something that you want to do. And his greatest example was his most viewed video on YouTube, and I think it still is, which is Make It Count. And basically, actually no, that one wasn't the one where he got angry. Okay, so it was another one that got a lot of views, and basically, long story short, some police officer ticketed him for like $50 because he was riding in a lane reserved for cars, except for the fact that it was completely illogical because there's no way he could not ride into that lane without getting run over himself, because New York is just so convoluted and filled with traffic. So long story short, he made this video mocking the whole fact by running into a bunch of cars and eventually ending it by running into a police car. And it was kind of comedic and also kind of a little bit angsty. and it got tons of views, probably because of those two things and the how well it was shot. So that was just really interesting. And just to tack on another story, his most viewed video, Make It Count, I think the lesson I learned from that one was basically just sometimes it's better to just have fun and enjoy life rather than always do what's told, and try something new. I think that's the big thing. Don't be scared of trying something brand new and crazy. So basically, before Casey was on YouTube, he had a very successful video advertising company, and basically he had this deal with Nike. It was a 3-video deal. The first 2 videos were pretty much standard Nike videos. You had the famous celebrity athletes, but then on his 3rd video he's decided to try something completely different. He took all the budget that they gave him for the video, and rather than making a cliche video, he ended up just spending it and traveling the world and making a video from that. And that video was the most viewed Nike ad video on YouTube for many years to come. So that was technically the 3rd thing, but I'm going to give you a bonus because it was really kind of tacked on to number 2. The 3rd thing I learned was from both of these people, because they both said the same thing, which is to connect with your audience. Connect with your audience, and that connection of relatability is just so much more important than anything like how expensive your camera is. And they really emphasize that it's more about being able to connect on a level with your audience, and that will lead you to success on YouTube more than fancy lights or really good graphics or editing or anything like that, which I find really interesting because and it does make sense. I mean, we are humans at the end of the day, and what matters more than flashy stuff is human to human connection. Now that's technically bonus tip 4, but I want to keep going. I'm going to give you one last tip. And now this one is from Chris Sacca. So Chris Sacca, he's one of Tim Ferriss's best friends. He's a tech investor as well, invested in Twitter. He's been on Shark Tank, and he's really well known for wearing cowboy shirts. So I have the page here, and he basically says, go to as many higher level meetings as possible. And basically he says, go to all the meetings you can, even if you're not invited, and figure out how to be helpful. If people wonder why you're there, just start taking notes. Read all the notes, gain a general knowledge of the job function. Just make yourself as useful as you can. Now that point really reminds me of something that the marketing legend and entrepreneur Jay Abraham said. And he basically said when he was starting out, he just would show up to meetings he wasn't invited to and just sit there and take notes and learn as much as he can on the sideline, and then absorb it and then try and help as much as he could in a similar manner. But this is a great segue to get to the area where I start critiquing this book. The one thing that I don't like, and we'll illustrate this with that last bit of advice, is that you definitely hit a point of contradictory advice, because I study a lot of billionaires specifically, and for them, I'm all about, finding the best people in the world at something and learning from them. But if you go to the top and you just listen to billionaires, they all say like limit or remove meetings because they're very highly unproductive. So how do you align that with these people telling you to go to as many meetings as possible? That seems contradictory, doesn't it? Well, they're talking about different stages in life. When you're like broke, you're just starting out, you have no knowledge but a lot of time, you're young, then of course you want to volunteer your time and kind of do that. But then when you're on the other side of it and you're really trying to make the most of your time, and you have 100 meetings you could attend, you're running $1 billion company, things change, and then you start optimizing because most of your meetings are unproductive and you already have that knowledge base and those connections to go with. So again, this book does it attempts to do a decent job. I wish it could do a better job of kind of like optimizing that and really being like very focused and clear on that. But maybe they don't know about those distinctions. And so I think it may confuse people when they run into contradictory advice. But a more pressing issue with this book, again, I did say I was going to go a little hard in the critique section, is that it is pretty much a profile of a bunch of successful people being interviewed. And he has mentioned a few times in his podcast that this wouldn't be what this book is because there's enough of that. And trust me, I mean, I've read tons of books like that. In fact, a lot of the people profiled in this book, like Damon John with his book Power of Broke, or Ed Catmull with his book Creativity Inc., and so on and so forth, they've done exactly that. They wrote books profiling other successful people in this very similar manner. So Tim saying that it's not one of these books because, you know, he has this, it's like specially organized to kind of do it in his own way, but at the same time it kind of is like I'm not really seeing why it's any different from dozens of those other like success books that profile a number of successful people. Having said that, nonetheless, I think this book, I'm seeing a lot of people buy this book, and it's getting this book, this type of format, into the hands of more people than would have otherwise. I think in the self-help world, it's kind of been overdone, but in the general public, like, no one's really heard of or read books like Getting There, Power of Broke, Tools of Titans, and so on and so forth, which pretty much profile successful people. So generally speaking, you know, arguably it's not a big deal, but that kind of leads me to the biggest issue, which is that, you know, he kind of just lays it out there. I think it's just because, like, he interviews who he can, and he also interviews who interests him. And those interests kind of lead to something that betters his own life without necessarily being the best content for someone who really wants to succeed. One problem I really struggle with a lot of these books is simply the fact that 95% of the people profiled have started some company that's like $1 billion company, or they're entrepreneurs. But what if I don't want to be a business person or entrepreneur? I mean, there's 90% of us, we have other skill sets and talents outside of being an entrepreneur. And I know how he would counteract that argument. He would say, well, you can still learn very entrepreneurial tendencies that can be applied to any area of life. You can, if you want to be an artist, or if you want to be a painter or sculptist or librarian or freelance graphic designer, whatever the heck you want to be, programmer, you can still, you know, take these tendencies from these billionaires and take their business practices and make more money or whatever else you want to do in your own life. And I think to an extent that's true. I think, you know, with the habits and all the other stuff mentioned, yes, but at the same time, I'm still just struggling a bit to really earn more money despite that stuff. So I think that's one of those things. I want to just conclude with saying at least a few good things, because I don't want to leave on a sour note. I think, will you be better off reading this book than not reading this? Absolutely. I really think that you should check it out. Don't get overwhelmed by the size. Pick out who you think will interest you. What I found really cool was that Tim chose very unique places to place some of the interviewees. Like, some of them are well known as, you know, athletes or something else, and rather than placing them in the healthy section of the book, he might place them in the wise section or the wealthy section. I think it's very interesting. It could be even better if the people profiled weren't such a motley crew. I mean, some of these people are like very bizarre. Like, some of them are like chess prodigies, others are like bloggers, others are writers, others are creative people. And the issue with that is that there are certain universals, but to go so far as to say that, you know, you can apply all of these to your life and there's, you know, all the advice they give is universal is a little too far, because you know, some rules for success that work for an artist or for a physicist just quite frankly don't work for chess or something else. Some do, but I think this book has a bias to go a little bit too far and say those universal tendencies kind of work for every other field, and that can lead to a lot of trouble, as illustrated with my meeting example, if you're not really specific. So nonetheless, I think this is worth checking out. Would I give it a perfect rating, 5 out of 5? No. Would I give it a 4 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5? Yes, I think so. You are definitely better off reading this book, but don't read the whole thing. I think if you can just find those areas that will help you the most, do it. Find those people, those artists, those occupations that most align with where you want to go in life, and just read those profiles, and you will get ahead. And that's kind of how the book's intended. You shouldn't read the whole thing, which I really like, because that's something that has been troubling me. Hope you like this video. Of course, if you're new to this channel is all about self-development and success. You can hit the subscribe button below for free updates every Thursday. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video.